"Please don't do that," the shy rancher begged, but the giant widow placed her head on it and did the unthinkable. "Please, don't do that." The virgin giant bride's voice trembled in the candlelit barn as the rancher reached for her, but Jedediah McCain didn't stop. What he did next to Beatrice, the 6'4" mail-order bride who towered over his 5'6" frame, shocked every soul in Copper Ridge the very next morning. She had begged him not to come closer, not to see the truth of who she really was, not to touch the woman every man had rejected. But the rancher did it anyway. He did something so tender, so unexpected, that this virgin giant who'd spent her whole life being mocked would weep in his arms. And when dawn broke, he would carry her into town and do something so bold, so defiant, that the whole town would stand frozen in the street, speechless. But why was she begging him to stop? What dark secret was this giant bride hiding that made her terrified of her own wedding night? And what did this small rancher do that no other man had dared, something that would either save them both or destroy everything they had left? 3 days earlier, the stagecoach rolled into Copper Ridge under a burning afternoon sun. Dust hung thick in the air. The wooden wheels creaked to a stop in front of the general store, and Jedediah McCain stood waiting, hat in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. He'd spent 3 months' savings on that mail-order bride fee. His uncle's will was clear as creek water: marry by his 30th birthday or lose the ranch. He had 4 days left. 4 days to save everything his family had built. The stagecoach door swung open, and Jedediah's world tilted sideways. She was a mountain. Beatrice Holloway stepped down from that coach and kept unfolding upward like she'd never stop. 6 feet 4 inches of raw-boned woman, shoulders broad as a plow horse, hands that could palm a watermelon whole. Her simple gray dress strained across a body built for hard labor, not Sunday socials. Around Jedediah, Copper Ridge's main street went dead silent. Shopkeepers froze mid-sweep. Women gasped behind their hands. And then the laughter started. Old Dutch Miller, leaning against the saloon post, spat his tobacco and howled loud enough to wake the dead. "That's your bride, McCain. Hell, she could use you as a toothpick." The laughter spread like wildfire through dry grass. Men doubled over. Women whispered behind gloved fingers. Their eyes wide with shock and something meaner: satisfaction. Little McCain finally got what he deserved: a freak to match the runt. Beatrice's face flushed scarlet, but she held her chin high, those startling blue eyes meeting Jedediah's for just one heartbeat before dropping to the dust. Shame rolled off her like heat from a forge, her massive hands twisted together, knuckles white. "Mr. McCain." Her voice was soft, musical even, threaded with a Carolina accent that didn't match her size. "I understand if you want to send me back. The agency said you asked for a strong woman, but I should have been honest about my height. I know I'm not what you expected. I know I'm too much." Jedediah stood there at 5'6", looking up at her, his throat tight. He'd heard laughter like this his whole life. Half a man McCain. Runt. Midget rancher. The words had carved trenches in his soul. He knew exactly what she was feeling right now: the burning shame, the wish to disappear, the certainty that you're fundamentally wrong just for existing. Behind them, Dutch Miller was holding court now, his voice booming. "Little McCain finally got himself a woman. She'll probably roll over and crush him on their wedding night, if he can even reach her to say, 'I do.'" The crowd roared. Beatrice flinched like she'd been struck. A tear escaped down her weathered cheek before she could stop it, and Jedediah watched her try so hard not to break, not to show weakness in front of these vultures circling for blood. Her jaw trembled. Her breath came shallow and quick. And in that moment, Jedediah McCain made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. The top of his head barely reached her shoulder. He looked up, way up, and held out his hand. "Welcome to Copper Ridge, Miss Holloway. I hope you're ready for hard work. The ranch is struggling, but it's honest land, and I'm an honest man." He paused, then added quietly, so only she could hear over the jeering crowd, "And I don't give a damn what size you are." Beatrice's eyes went wide. Her lips parted in shock. For 3 heartbeats, she just stared down at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Then slowly, carefully, like she was handling something fragile, she placed her enormous hand in his. It swallowed his completely. Her palm was calloused and scarred, working hands that had known pain. The crowd exploded with fresh laughter, but Jedediah didn't let go. He held her gaze, squeezed her hand once, firm and sure, and led her toward his wagon. Neither of them saw the black carriage that rolled into town an hour later. Neither noticed the well-dressed man in the expensive suit who stepped out and asked the sheriff a very specific question. "I'm looking for an unusually tall woman. Goes by the name Beatrice Holloway. Have you seen her?" The McCain Ranch sat 3 miles outside Copper Ridge, a collection of weathered buildings that whispered of better days long gone. Beatrice stood in the yard taking it all in. The sagging barn with gaps in the roof, fences broken and leaning like drunken men, thin cattle dotting brown pastures that should have been green. The house itself looked tired, paint peeling, one shutter hanging crooked. This wasn't just a struggling ranch. This was a dying one. "It's not much," Jedediah said quietly, climbing down from the wagon. His voice carried shame he tried to hide. "My uncle drank most of the profit away before he passed. Left me the land, but not much else. The bank's been circling like buzzards. If I don't turn things around soon." He trailed off, but Beatrice heard what he didn't say. He'd lose everything. That's why he needed a wife so desperately. Not for love, for survival. "I'll take the barn," Beatrice said firmly, already moving toward it. "You keep the house." "You don't have to do that. The house is small, but there's a bed, and I prefer the barn." Her voice went flat, closed off. "I'm used to it, and I take up less space out there." She wouldn't look at him. Couldn't. Because if she did, she might see the same look every other man had given her eventually. Disappointment, disgust, regret. Better to keep her distance now before it hurt worse later. Before Jedediah could argue, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. 5 riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Beatrice's stomach dropped. Dutch Miller sat tall on a massive black stallion, 4 of his ranch hands flanking him like an army. They were all grinning, and that grin promised nothing good. "Came to see the giant bride," Dutch called out, swinging down from his horse with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Wanted to make sure you survived the wagon ride, McCain. She didn't sit on you and break you in half, did she?" His men roared with laughter, slapping their knees. Dutch swaggered closer, boots kicking up dust, eyes locked on Beatrice like she was livestock at auction. "Damn, girl, you really are a freak of nature, aren't you? What do they feed you back east? Horse grain, bull's blood?" "That's enough." Jedediah stepped between them, and it would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking, this tiny man trying to shield a giant. Dutch looked down at him and laughed so hard he had to brace his hands on his knees. "Oh, this is rich. The runt defending the freak. Listen here, McCain. Everybody in the territory knows why you ordered a bride. Your uncle's will says you gotta marry by your 30th birthday or lose this sad excuse for a ranch. But hell, boy, you could have at least found yourself a normal woman. Now the whole county's gonna laugh at you worse than before. No one's gonna do business with the man who married a circus monster." The words hit Beatrice like physical blows. Monster. Freak. The same words that had followed her from Charleston to here. Across 1,000 miles, and a lifetime of shame. Her hands started shaking. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth and never be seen again. But then Dutch stepped even closer, looking her up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl. Tell you what though, McCain, if you get tired of this giant, if she's too much woman for you to handle, you send her my way. I bet I could break her in real good. Might be fun to wrestle with something that size, see if she's as strong as she looks. The threat in his voice was clear. So was the hunger. Beatrice had seen that look before, in Cornelius Ashford's eyes back in Charleston. The look that said she wasn't a person, just a thing to be owned, used, displayed. Her heart hammered. Her breath came short. And then something inside her snapped. Her hand shot out faster than a rattlesnake strike and grabbed Dutch Miller's shirt collar, lifting him clean off his feet like he weighed nothing at all. The yard went dead silent. Dutch's eyes bulged. His boots dangled 6 inches off the ground, kicking uselessly. His face went purple as she held him there with one arm, steady as iron. Mr. Miller. Her voice was still soft, still musical, but now it carried something new, steel wrapped in velvet. You're on our property. You've insulted your host. You've disrespected a married woman. And you're boring me. She held him suspended there for 3 long seconds while his men sat frozen on their horses, too shocked to move. Then she set him down, gentle as placing a teacup on a table. I suggest you leave. Now. Dutch stumbled backward, coughing, one hand at his throat. Fury and humiliation battled across his face like thunderclouds. He jabbed a thick finger at Jedediah, his voice raw and ragged. You'll regret that, McCain. Both of you. When you lose this ranch, and you will, because I'm gonna make damn sure every merchant, every banker, every rancher in this territory knows what you are. Don't come crying to me for work. Your name's gonna be mud. And her? He spat in Beatrice's direction. That thing you married, she just signed your death warrant. They rode out in tense silence, dust rising behind them like smoke signals declaring war. The moment they disappeared over the hill, Beatrice's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the fence post to steady herself, her whole body shaking now, her breath coming in gasps. What had she done? She'd just destroyed Jedediah's last chance at keeping his ranch. She'd made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. She'd ruined everything, just like she always did. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears burning her eyes. I'm so sorry. I just made everything worse. They'll never do business with you now. The bank will hear about this. You'll lose the ranch because of me. I should have stayed quiet. I always mess everything up. God, I'm so stupid. I should have just... Beatrice. Jedediah's voice cut through her spiral, firm but gentle. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the anger and regret she knew would be there. But then she felt his hand on her arm, small, warm, steady. Look at me. Slowly she turned. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something she'd never seen directed at her before. Admiration, pride, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. That, Jedediah said quietly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, was the finest thing I've seen in 5 years. Beatrice stared at him, unable to process his words. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, dark and heavy with rain. And back in town, the well-dressed stranger in the expensive suit was asking the sheriff more questions, showing him a photograph, offering a very large reward for information about a runaway woman named Beatrice Holloway. The net was closing. Time was running out. But neither of them knew it yet. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped in firelight and honesty, of learning each other's stories in the quiet way that only happens when the world outside stops spinning. Ezra told her about his father, about fists that came fast and a mother who faded like morning mist until one day she was just gone. about learning to make himself invisible, to speak soft, to hide every tender thing inside him where it couldn't be used as a weapon. Delilah told him about Samuel, the good and the hard parts both. How he'd loved her fierceness, but sometimes seemed exhausted by it. How she'd made herself smaller for him without realizing it, laughing quieter, standing with a slight hunch, trying to be the kind of wife a mining man could be proud of instead of embarrassed by. He was a good man, she said on the second night. Lying beside Ezra on blankets he'd spread before the fire, their bodies close but careful, honoring the newness of this thing between them. But I don't think he ever really knew what to do with all of me. Ezra's arm tightened around her shoulders. Then he was a fool. When the storm finally broke on the fourth morning, they stood at the window together, watching sunlight turn the snow into diamonds. It was breathtaking and terrible all at once, because they both knew what came next. The world was waiting out there, the town with its rules and judgments, the church ladies with their sharp tongues, the men who'd call Ezra less than a man for choosing a woman who wouldn't bend. I should go, Delilah said, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Because leaving meant going back to her empty house and her empty life, and pretending these 3 days hadn't changed everything. Ezra turned to her, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that still stole her breath. Marry me. The words hung in the morning light, simple and terrifying and absolutely perfect. Ezra. I know it's fast. I know the town will say we've lost our minds. I know there'll be talk and trouble, and probably a sermon or two about the dangers of sinful cohabitation during blizzards. He smiled then, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. But I also know I don't want to spend another day without you. I don't want you going back to that empty house. I don't want to count Tuesdays until you knock on my door again. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep, holding you every night, and build a life where neither of us has to be small or silent or alone ever again. Delilah's heart felt too big for her chest, like it might crack her ribs and spill out into the snow-bright morning. Yes, she breathed. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed in the sunlight streaming through his window, and it felt like a promise, like a beginning, like the first day of a life they'd both stopped believing was possible. But neither of them saw the rider approaching through the snow. Neither of them heard the horse's hooves crunching closer. And neither of them knew that Redemption Creek's reckoning was about to arrive. The knock on the door came hard and sharp, like judgment itself demanding entry. Ezra felt Delilah stiffen in his arms, felt her pull away instinctively, old habits of hiding kicking in, even as her eyes blazed with defiance. But he caught her hand, held it tight, and when he opened that door, he didn't let go. Pastor Williams stood on his porch, snow up to his knees, his face red from cold and something that looked dangerously close to righteous fury. Behind him, 3 of Redemption Creek's finest upstanding citizens sat on horses, their eyes hard and judging. Ezra Caldwell, the pastor said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and disappointed expectations. We came to check on Widow Morgan, seeing as her horse was found sheltered in your barn. We were concerned for her safety and reputation. The unspoken accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ezra felt the old fear rising, the instinct to apologize, to make himself small, to explain and justify and beg forgiveness for daring to want something beautiful. But then Delilah squeezed his hand, and he remembered who he was choosing to be. Mrs. Morgan's arm was dislocated, Ezra said, his voice steady and clear. The storm was too dangerous for her to travel. She stayed here, and I cared for her injury. We acted with complete propriety. It was a lie, sort of. They'd been proper in the ways that mattered to men like Pastor Williams, but improper in every way that actually counted. They'd bared their souls, shared their hearts, chosen each other over everything the town expected. The pastor's eyes narrowed. 3 days alone, unchaperoned. You understand what this looks like? It looks, Delilah said, stepping forward with her head held high, her 6'2" frame towering over every man on that porch. Like a good man saved my life and tended my injury when I could have frozen to death trying to ride home in a blizzard. Her voice rang with steel. It looks like kindness and decency, Pastor. Unless you're the kind of man who sees sin in every shadow and suspects the worst of people who've done nothing but survive. The pastor's face went purple, but before he could speak, Ezra stepped beside Delilah, their shoulders touching, united. Mrs. Morgan has agreed to be my wife, he said, and his voice didn't shake even once. We'll be married as soon as you're able to perform the ceremony. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the men on horseback actually laughed, sharp and cruel. You're marrying her. Ezra, son, that woman's bigger than you are. Stronger too, probably. What kind of man? The kind who knows strength when he sees it, Ezra interrupted, his voice carrying a power that surprised even himself. The kind who's done pretending that gentleness is weakness and size is what makes a man. The kind who'd rather have one day of honest love than a lifetime of living for the approval of people who'll never see past their own narrow fears. He looked at each man in turn, meeting their eyes without flinching. I'm marrying Delilah Morgan because she's the finest person I've ever known, because she sees me for who I really am and loves me anyway, because together we're stronger than we ever were apart. He paused, his hand finding Delilah's again. And if that offends you, if that doesn't fit your idea of how a man and woman should be, then I invite you to take your judgment and your gossip and ride back to town without us, because we're done living for your approval. Pastor Williams stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, something shifted in his weathered face. Maybe he saw the truth of what they were, two lonely people who'd found each other in a storm. Maybe he remembered his own wife, gone 10 years now, and how he'd have fought the whole world to keep her. Or maybe he was just tired of being the voice of judgment in a town that had too much of it already. Saturday, he said finally. Come to the church Saturday afternoon. I'll marry you then. He turned to leave, then paused. And Ezra, for what it's worth, I think you're braver than most men I know. The riders left, their horses kicking up snow that sparkled in the morning light. Ezra and Delilah stood in the doorway long after they'd gone, holding each other, watching the sun climb higher in a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Saturday, Delilah whispered, and Ezra heard everything in that single word, hope and fear and joy and the terrifying courage it takes to choose love over safety. Saturday, he agreed, and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. And every day after that for the rest of our lives. 3 months later, Redemption Creek would still talk about the wedding where the giant widow wore Samuel's old silver locket alongside her new ring, where the shy rancher spoke his vows in a voice that didn't shake once, where love looked nothing like what they expected and everything like what it should be. They'd talk about how Delilah Morgan Caldwell ran her mining claim and her husband's ranch with equal skill, how she stood tall at town meetings with Ezra beside her, quiet and strong. How the shy rancher wrote poetry that his wife read aloud at church socials, his words painting pictures of love that looked like two broken people deciding broken was beautiful if you found the right person to be broken with. And years later, when children asked why Mr. Caldwell spoke so soft and Mrs. Caldwell stood so tall, the old-timers would smile and tell the story of the blizzard that trapped two souls together and taught a whole town that real strength isn't about being loud or big or traditionally powerful. It's about having the courage to be exactly who you are and loving someone brave enough to do the same. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another tale of love, courage, and second chances. and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? We love hearing from our viewers around the world.